All right, everybody, welcome back from lunch. We're going to start our lightning talks now. First up is Martin Brown with Renesis, and he's going to be talking about what happened to Elroot in the past couple weeks. So here's Martin.
Thanks, Igor. Hi, thanks for coming back from lunch and listening to this talk. We recently found out something interesting about what happened with the Elroot server, and that's what this is about. So we come out with a couple of questions, and we come out with some potential recommendations, or at least thoughts about how we could address the issue. So let's get started. Probably everybody in this room knows the importance of the root servers. There are 13 of them, 13 root server IP addresses. There are about 160. Some other people in the room may know the exact number today, but there are about 160 actual physical servers that provide these answers, but there are 13 addresses. The prefixes in which those addresses live are anycasted. So back in 97 or so, in order to accommodate a larger number of root name servers in the response packet, which can only be 512 bytes, we collectively renamed all of the servers to be A, B, C, D, all the way up through M. So that's why we have 13 root server IPs, because that's what fits in the response packet. Elroot is run by ICANN, has been run by ICANN for quite a number of years. The old IP, 198.32.64.12, was in use until about May 2nd. On November 1st, and actually prior to that they had announced it, ICANN brought up a new root server IP on which Elroot was going to be providing answers. Essentially, Elroot was moving from the old IP to the new IP. So for the following 6 months, ICANN actually ran both on the 198 IP and the 199 IP. And then on May 2nd, they turned it off. In the meantime, unbeknownst to ICANN, new unauthorized servers started appearing. December 15th, we see Community DNS out of England start advertising for the 198.32.64.0/24 net block. So suddenly they're getting some of the requests to Elroot. March 18th, EP.net picks up a few, and April 1st, DXN also starts advertising. On May 2nd, ICANN turned off their 198.32.64.12. They turned it off. They stopped advertising the prefix. And somebody thought, hey, well, why don't we make a query to the Elroot server and see if it answers? It answered. That's not what was supposed to happen. That's when we got involved. They called us and said, hey, can you tell us what's going on? Why is it that how is it that this network is still routed? And we went back and we started looking, and we found, well, just a moment, I'll show you the graph of what we found. In response, once we became involved, ICANN put some pressure on the unauthorized Elroot server operators to turn them off. By May 16th, they were all turned off. This is the graph of what it looks like. Hopefully the blue is legible. The blue is actually the percentage of Renesis peers. We have about 250, 260 peers right now, but that is the percentage of peers that see an origination for Elroot from ICANN, that blue line, that top blue line. So you can see pretty much when Community DNS out of England started advertising, they picked up about 20%. From our vantage points, 20% of our peers chose Community DNS for Elroot, for the prefix 198.32.64. And then later on, you can see that as EP and EP.net and DXN actually start advertising, that they pick up about 5% a pop. May 2nd, sharp drop off in the blue line. Well, that's ICANN. They're no longer advertising, and immediately Community DNS pretty much takes the supermajority of route preference across our peer set. So we have lots of questions as a result of this. We don't know the answers to these. We have some guesses. We'd love to hear from anybody who knows about this. Why was ICANN not using their own space? Was IP space difficult to get in 1997? Why the change after 10 years? There are a lot of DNS servers Many people may still be running DNS servers. There may be people in this room who are running DNS servers with a root hints file, including 198.32.64.12. Do we all subscribe to the ICANN blog, get those messages? So why didn't Manning give the space to ICANN? Manning has 5/16s and a /22. That's an awful lot of space. ICANN needs a single /24 for the L root. And why all the bogus L root servers? Could be research, but for 6 months? Okay, so is this Tempest in a teacup? What would you do if you had your own root server? Well, let's see. We know what bind does when it starts up. One of the first things it does is it picks one of the root servers and it queries and it gets the current list from the root server it's picked. It gets the current list of root servers. Well, if you can prime the root hints on a running instance of bind, you can hand back a response that says, I'm all the root name servers. Okay, well, you can also provide updated NS records for all TLDs. What does that mean? Well, that means instead of sending a delegation, instead of sending to the GTLD servers, you can say that the NS record points to you. Well, pretty much if you have control of the root server and all the root servers, you can control everything. You can set TTL to 0 for your answers, which means that they'll just keep asking you. For each, you can perform recursion by default, inserting anything you want. You can log everything, you can censor it. So this is a problem. Now, I also want to state, we actually checked some of the servers that were up at the time, acting as LRoot. We saw no evidence of any malfeasance. Our concern is the fragility of these 13 IP addresses and the potential for abuse. So we thought about this some, and we have some suggestions about what may be done. And this is obviously just the first stuff that came to our mind. So you can check the ICANN site at least yearly, update your root hints. ISC, I believe, publishes the root hints as well. Update that stuff. You can filter announcements. What does that mean? Well, that means that at your edge, you can refuse to accept routes. You can ignore routes that don't have the correct origination pattern. We're talking about a small number of prefixes, okay? So there are there are 12/24s that are originated, and there's 1/16 in which a root server lives that are originated. So you can use those, and we've identified the origination pattern currently for all of these. We've identified that on the blog. You can use that as a filter. These are pretty key addresses. It's 13 filters. That's one possibility. You can also have a small job internally that runs, queries your own name server and asks it for what it thinks the root hints are and do a diff against a known set. That'll tell you when something changes. So another option is to globally monitor root name server announcements. That would need an organization behind it. And then finally, maybe an organization should publish signed root name server registry along with origination patterns. That's it. Any questions? Raz.
Yeah, one quick comment. Richard Steenberg and Inlayer. As someone who actually transits community DNS, we had them request us to accept this route, and we actually got authorization from Bill Manning for it. So it's not so much a prefix hijacking as a rejacking? Backjack?
Thank you.
Sean Dowland, Akamai. So you went back 10 years. I mean, the root server IPs have changed over the decades, and you had your list of whatever. But the reality is we have to assume they'll change. We don't want to make this list any more embedded in concrete than it already is. And I'm sure there's probably people still querying the old SRI net 10 address from 1982.
Sure.
So.
It's quite likely, and our concern is actually to find some way to codify that process and provide tools for audit trail and making sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen again, because it is rather frightening.
Steve Gibbard. So I'd make an observation on your comment that people can build filters by looking at current origination patterns for the routes. And for a lot of the Anycast routes, there's new instances being turned up frequently and new peering sessions being turned up pretty frequently. So even those legitimate paths are likely to change a fair amount.
Well, the path, you're quite correct. The upstream path may change, but what we have seen is that the origination pattern changes very infrequently. So
by origination pattern, you mean AS and prefix?
The origin for the given announcement.
Okay, which is relatively easy to forge too, but.
I'm sorry?
Which is relatively easy to forge.
Okay, yeah, you can forge that. Good point. It's not a perfect.
That doesn't help a whole lot.
It isn't a perfect solution.
Yeah, and the other comment I would make on this, I suppose, as a challenge to the current route operators would be that it looks like, as you were saying, 12 of the 13 root server addresses are now in independent/24s that don't appear to have much else in them. So it seems like at this point it would be possible for 12 of the root server operators to commit to those root servers never being renumbered again. Would the root server operators in the room be willing to make that commitment?
Does that invalidate V6 since they can't renumber? Hi, Patrick Gilmore, Akamai. You started to cover this in your presentation, and you may have finished, but I can't find the presentation online. You were mentioning that you could theoretically return any IP addresses because bind queries the root name server, and then it believes the answers.
Yep.
You said that you weren't seeing people doing things like returning themselves or false TLDs or anything like that. Were the people returning the reject or whatever prefix, were they returning that IP address for LRoot, or were they returning the real IP address for LRoot?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't recall.
Because if all they were doing is answering and returning the correct
They
roots.
were providing the correct answers for everything that we checked. We can only spot check. I'm not sure, though, whether they were returning 199, the new IP, or 198, the old.
Okay.
Am I answering your question?
Yes.
So yeah, I think this is a big deal, actually. And, I read your stuff and some other things on this. And if you're sitting in this room and you're not real concerned about this, then you should be, or you probably shouldn't be here in NANOG. I think the, sort of the root franchise, as some people refer to it as, and the fact that there hasn't been public statements or accountability on, one is what are people doing with this data? How could this happen? ICANN and the root operators should certainly be monitoring for this, this kind of activity. And, I think there are 100 questions you could ask around this, and you hit some of those, and things like origin AS and even path monitoring and those and prefixes and dedicated IP space. There's a zillion things, but I think that, RSAC, which is under ICANN, and the root operators group should definitely be saying something about this and, and stepping up and adding some transparency and accountability, because the fact that this can happen with the root name server, to me, is just, I don't know. I mean, it just illustrates further. I mean, the fact that malware today, always compromises resolution paths so people can own any of those hosts. Anyone that queries this, you now own every one of these hosts, or, for phishing or whatever it is you want to do. But I'm just trying to say that if you're sitting in this room and you're not real concerned with this and pressing ICANN or the root operators, then you probably should be thinking a lot about that, because this is a really big deal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Martin.
Thanks.